I'm Tidge Roller. I taught Sunday school for a long time at Emmanuel long ago. This is a book that I used with my classes. I just happened on it. It's called Bible Studies You Can't Forget, No Matter How Hard You Try. Today's story is going to be about David and Goliath. The story of David and Goliath is in the Old Testament, the first book of Samuel, chapter 17. It's a story of the large and the heavy and the small and the crafty, the high and the mighty and the lowly and the humble, the tall and the short, and the light and the dark, and the sweet and the sour. You might call it a story of contrast. When our story begins, the army of the children of Israel has been challenged by the army of the Philistines. It is a time of war. The Philistines were terrible people who hated anything nice, like art, poetry, or music. And they had no taste. For breakfast, they had a glass of grease. For lunch, a bowl of grease. And for dinner, a dish of grease. If they were greasy, it was no coincidence. And their champion, Goliath, was every inch a Philistine and a grease ball, all 114 inches of him. That's 9.5 feet tall. That's a giant. That's a monster. And he was a mess. His uniform was a mess. His tent was a mess, and he didn't make his bed. He swept it, and not too often. That was also because sometimes he would have dinner in bed, fall asleep, and roll in his dinner. His bed got to be so greasy some nights he'd get into it and slide right out. Goliath was heart and soul and body and mind a Philistine. He stood for everything they did. Every day he would get up and say, "When I get my hands on a good book, I just can't put it down. Get me a classic. Watch me tear right through it." And every day he tore a book into teeny, weeny pieces with his bare hands. And when he was through with his office work, he went out to taunt the soldiers of the children of Israel. He did that every day, twice a day. He liked to stand on a high hill and look down on them and yell, "Hey, you guys over there, you want to learn the truth about yourselves? You'd rather twitch than fight. Give me some men who are stout-hearted men, because all I see in front of me is a bunch of chickens. Hey, chickie, yeah. And the soldiers of the children of Israel would boo him, boo, and he would go on. Can't take it, huh? There's more where that came from. You think you're so strong? I've seen better muscles in a fish store. To which they'd cry, "Boo, that stinks." To which they replied, "Lord, deliver us." He liked to cap off his performances with a rendition of, "Look at you, the hoo-hoo with a ha-ha-ha on your head. Which of you wants to fight? Come on, yeah. Of course, no one came forward to fight Goliath. No one in his right mind would. Goliath was a beast. And now for a change of pace, we shift our scene to David, a young shepherd high on a lonely hill. David was one of the civilians of the children of Israel. He was everything you wanted in a person. He was handsome, he was gifted, he played the lute and the lyre, and he sang in the choir. And he had good taste. One day, when he was playing on the lyre and singing to his sheep, he remembered his brothers at the front. He put down his lyre and said, "Enough of this interlude." And he decided to head off to visit. Well, when he got there, Goliath was still at his usual spot, mouthing off just as he had been for 40 days. As David came nearer, he could hear Goliath. "An army ought to go far soon, and I hope you stay there. You guys are the one for the books, the book of dumbbells." And so bad were these jokes that the children of Israel rolled on the ground in deep agony and clutched their sides to keep from crying. One of them said to David, "Now you see why war is hell." And David said, "This is terrible. This is the worst I've ever heard. Something's got to be done about this." So David went to the army of the children of Israel headquarters to see his commander-in-chief, King Saul. Saul said, "Sit down, Dave. I'll be with you in a minute. This Goliath business has got me down." David replied, "Cheer up, King Saul. I'm going to challenge Goliath." Saul was not as optimistic as David. He said, "Why?" Why, this armor alone weighs twice as much as you do. What makes you think you can go out there and face a giant like Goliath and live to keep your place in history? I see great things for you. Why come a cropper with a creep like Goliath? But David answered, if I come a cropper, that'll be my share. I'll be a sharecropper. However, I don't think I will, because God is on my side. Then Saul offered him his own personal armor-plated armor. Well, if you put it that way, Saul said, go ahead, but take my armor, please. David shook his head and turned it down, saying delicately, no, thank you. I've got my slingshot and 5 smooth stones. My motto is, less is more. So David the aesthete met Goliath the Philistine on the field of battle. And when David got there, Goliath was in rare form. He was killing the crowd with his jokes, laying them dead in the aisles. You guys are so short you put your feet in your pockets and walk on your hands. You guys are so weak it takes 2 of you to breathe. And the children of Israel were saying to him, get out of here, take a bus. So which Goliath threw back, why don't you take a long walk off a short pier? Why don't you put an egg in your shoe and beat it? Scrambola. Then David interrupted him. Goliath, yoo-hoo, I've come to take your challenge. Goliath looked around and didn't see anybody. That was because Goliath was so tall and David was so small. So David called out again, yoo-hoo, down here, Goliath. Goliath found him after a while, and was he surprised? You? You're going to challenge me? That's the funniest thing I ever heard. He started laughing. You're so little, he said, falling to his knees and pounding on the ground. He laughed so hard, tears popped out of his eyes. And when he beat on the ground, it shook so much David was bounced in the air. But David was starting to boil. Get up and fight like a man, he told Goliath. Goliath stood up. He fixed David with the business end of his steely glare and spat out the following statement. Sure, little flea, but I'm warning you right now, I'm going to make bird food and cat meat out of you. He pulled out his sword. Where's your weapon? He asked. David told him, I have a leather sling and 5 stones, and one of them has its name on you. Oh, yeah, let me have it. Okay, said David, you asked for it. And David put his hand in his bag and pulled out a stone, inserted it into his sling, swung the sling around 3 times over his head and slung the stone. The stone sank into Goliath's forehead and he fell on his face to the earth, stone dead. And after that, David took Goliath's sword and cut off Goliath's head. And then he showed it to everybody. And that is the story of how David rocked Goliath to sleep permanently.